Hello and welcome to the special session on electric mobility for mass public transportation, the path for EV revolution. Now, the government of India is committed to shift India to electric mobility. While major strides are being taken in the private ownership of EV and the e-bike space, the major pivot will come once public transportation will go the electric way. But it is so much easier said than done. I mean, what's required is efficient and well spread out battery charging infrastructure, good battery packs, and large capacity engines. Now, my panel today will look into these aspects and share their insights on what the way ahead is for India's EV revolution. Allow me to introduce my panelists. We have Ms. Charulata. She's the lead consultant, electric mobility and clean energy at Natural Resources Defense Council. Mr. Randhir Singh, senior specialist at Niti Aayog. Mr. Sanjay Krishnan, founder Lithium Urban Technologies, and Mr. Vivek Ramachandra, Senior Vice President, Grid Integration, Hitachi ABB Power Grids. Thank you so much, ma'am and gentlemen, for being on this panel with me today. Ma'am, I want to start off with you, and I first want to talk about the importance of the adequacy of India's grid infrastructure for EV evolution. Now, recently, you had written a blog post, or I think about a year ago, rather, in 2019, and it was speaking about the three different approaches for selecting a charging point site: the stakeholder approach, the modeling approach, and the hybrid approach. And you said mostly hybrid approach would work well for India. How have things changed with this pandemic, and how are you seeing things evolve since then?
Thank you so much, Sumit. And you very rightly said we are actually working on, siting of chargers, and it's very important to actually build a network of chargers. Specifically, the first set of chargers that are coming in, it's very important to site them correctly and ensure that the locations that we are selecting to set up those chargers are the right ones, so that the charging station gets utilized in the right way and the utilization is higher to make business sense. The pandemic definitely has slowed down the plans because people were not going out. The government's focus had shifted to COVID, and we are kind of still sailing through it. But I would still like to commend the state governments, because the work has been carrying on, though the pace has slowed down. But again, to basically ensure that we have chargers on the ground, it's important to site them correctly. And like you said, there were three approaches that we talked about. The most
Yes.
important one was the hybrid approach that I can explain a little bit in more detail. It basically means that you need to look at what the stakeholders say. So go reach out to the community, reach out to the important
Yeah.
stakeholders in the state, and see, check with them what the important locations are. And the second thing is do a bit of the modeling. For the modeling, we need a lot of data, which is currently not available in India. You need to look at traffic patterns, where the people are
Mhm.
staying, whether these people can afford electric vehicles or not. So a bit of modeling with a bit of consultation coming together makes the hybrid approach. And bringing in all
Fantastic.
the government departments, the right stakeholders,
Yes.
we can go ahead with the siting.
Super. Now I'll take this ahead to Mr. Singh. Now, Mr. Singh, it's said that electric charging and customer side system products and solutions are expected to grow at a CAGR of 13.6% through calendar year 2030. For this, of course, we need while we need private participation, government direction, government guidance is absolutely most important. You'd written a blog post on the Times of India website talking about the strategy for states to prepare and tune their EV policies, and you spoke about how states should pick up their own strengths rather than just blindly copy each other's EV policies. Similar to you, question to you, sir, that the impact of COVID-19, how have you seen now states moving along this EV journey, this EV revolution that we're trying to bring about?
Thanks, Sumit, and very valid question. So let me start with something which right now the government is doing and which is already in the public purview, which is the FAME 2. So FAME 2 policy was launched almost a year back, almost I should say now 2 year back. And because of the COVID, some of those impacts we couldn't see in the market as of now. But now again, post COVID, again we will see some sort of fine tuning, lot of steps from the government along with the PLI for the advanced chemistry cells. So 18,100
Right.
crore has been sanctioned under the PLI scheme for the advanced chemistry cells, which would be lithium ion plus the more advanced technologies which will be coming in the coming future. Now coming back to the what state and as a center we are doing. So at Niti Aayog we are running one program called State EV Accelerator Program, in which there are basically three parts. First part is we are helping the states who have not yet developed their states as well as union territories who have not yet developed their EV policies to develop the EV policies. Second is the states whose EV policies are at draft stage, which maybe 1 year or 2 year has passed, but state those not have been notified. And the third part is the some of the states like Karnataka who have launched their EV policies 2 years or 3 years back in 2017, and now this is the right time post COVID to fine tune that. Now the basic philosophy which is going to be is that the states should focus on the competitive plus cooperative federalism. That means they should compete among themselves, but that competition should not be in a way that somebody coming to India should face that there are 36 or 32 countries are there and they have to choose out of
Right.
them. So each and every state should play to their USP so that the investors, so that the what type of things you want to put in, for example, charging infrastructure, the battery factory or the manufacturing, there should be a clear cut availability of, I mean, the guidelines from the policy perspective, what supports they are going to get. So all those things have to be kept in mind while framing the EV policies of the states, and that's what we are working now. So this is one aspect of this from the EV
Hmm.
policy perspective. And EV policy actually covers the entire gamut of what are the state support which are going to be happening for the manufacturing, for the R&D, for the buses, and for the infrastructure. I would touch upon just
Right.
one point which Charu has also pointed out regarding the infrastructure. So the spatial distribution is very much required when you are putting the charging infrastructure in every any city or somewhere. So I'll give you one example that in case we have done a study in some of the cities. So the charging infrastructure actually drives the AV penetration in those areas. The density actually increases proportionally. So that sort of analysis, that spatial analysis is very much required for us to go ahead.
Absolutely. Yes, that's very much required, Mr. Singh, and it's a very valid point. And I'll take this ahead to Mr. Krishnan because he's actually one who's installed these charging points for his cabs. So, Mr. Krishnan, obviously you on the ground are seeing the importance of a well spread out charging infrastructure for the vehicles. So, just wanting to get in your learnings from that in when you set up your charging stations for your vehicles at Lithium Urban Technologies.
I think both the previous speakers have made extremely valid points in terms of the fact that obviously, like though we are ahead of a lot of other people, we are still in the infancy of putting up infrastructure, both as a company and as a nation. And obviously, the first step is really to get access, to make sure that you're in the right place where it is needed. You can't put a charging infrastructure that is optimized for, say, for say cost, while it is not optimized for access. Then in that case it'll never work. That means you can't travel for, say, 25 kilometers just to charge the car, because then in that case it just defeats the purpose altogether, right? I think the biggest impediment that we have seen is actually real estate.
Hmm.
And you will hear it in several fora that the cost of the real estate is actually more than electricity and the capital investment on the charger. When you look at it when you amortize everything on a per kilowatt hour basis, really the real estate cost is what kills you, right? Because let's say you go in the central business district of any city, or in a private
Yeah.
infrastructure, obviously the rentals are real commercial rentals, right? The for example, the parking space for a car could go from anywhere between 1,500 rupees per month to as high as 20,000 rupees a month, right? The consumer, on the other hand, is expecting power that is, pretty much everyone in India buys in one city, either petrol or diesel or CNG at one price, right? And you can't have it, that the differential is 20x in real estate price. So then how will you absorb it? Who will buy ultimately the value added electricity? So, and also longevity. So tomorrow you want to bring in, you want to invest in transformers, you want to invest in piping and renewable energy, the ability for you to do a very long term real estate deal, right? 10 years, 15 years. Today, all these petrol pumps that we see all across, the nation or across the world are pretty much, urban milestones. They've been there. People use them to give
Yeah.
direction, saying, "Aage wale HPCL pump se left jana," right? And my father did it,
Absolutely.
my grandfather did it, my son will use that as
Yeah.
a location marker. Now, for charging infrastructure to be put in such access points, right? And you can't put it in all petrol pumps, because in India, not all every petrol pump has a standardized design. But therefore, where do you get the land? Where do you put it? I think there has to be those kind of challenges will come about. I'm not saying that the government needs to solve or can solve for it, but I think it's something that will come about between the private sector, as long as there is a framework resolution which the government has put right in
Yes.
and I
Yes.
think the government has done a fantastic amount of work, and we'll get there. So there have been challenges, obviously, being first off the block. We've had to
Hmm.
create a whole bunch of things, but I think it's got simpler. It's got fundamentally simpler over the last 6 years of our journey, and which is actually a very, very good thing.
Fantastic. Yes, it's there've been ups and downs, obviously, but like you're saying, it's making a path for the way ahead. I will come back to your point on precedents set by other country, because I do want to talk about how we always look at China versus India, but on that I'll come back to that later in the discussion. Right now, I just want to come to Mr. Ramachandra. So, as per the FAME policy, which Mr. Singh was also speaking about, the government had specified targets for charging infrastructure, which was that at least one charging station within a grid of 4 by 4 kilometers, and fast charging stations along major highways at intervals of about 25 kilometers, and ultra fast charging stations across about every 100 kilometers. So, getting the infrastructure, like Mr. Krishnan said, yes, very important, but also having a fast charging system that can charge the battery fast. So obviously we're waiting lesser there. On that aspect, I want to bring you in with regards to Hitachi ABB's Power Grid's flash charging system. How is it the differentiator that we urgently require?
Well, in the fast charging system, which is done by Hitachi ABB as such, it is the one which charges especially this is used especially for the heavier equipment, buses or trucks as such. So this is used basically when the buses come and stop in the bus stop maybe for about 20 seconds. In that 20 seconds, the charging takes place. It pops up there is a increase in the charging of the battery, and then it goes on to the next. Or we have to design the system in such a way it works out economical between depot charging, terminal charging, and the fasting system. So this is something which has been done, and with this we get an advantage that the battery size, which is will come down to about 30%. The battery size will come down, which increases the efficiency of the bus, obviously, and then we would be in a position to add more number of passengers also. So this is works out much better in the complete scenario environment, and this is especially very useful if we are having this on the highways or on the throughways as such. So that it is what would happen is that uh, the charging the standardization would be called for in this case, because even there cannot be a new type of meeting arrangement which may not be possible to have. We should have some amount of standardization in the HTV area is what my submission is to Mr. Singh, because there is a lot of clarity in the two-wheeler and three-wheeler, but when you
Yes.
come towards the car upper car and come to the buses sector, we see that more clarity is to come. Rightly said, Mr. Krishnan, that all of us are grouping in the dark and feeling our way through. I am also aware that no country is way ahead as such. Even that way, I think even China is not so much ahead in case of the buses and the heavy transport as such.
Yeah, absolutely. But actually, I will, Mr. Singh, before you respond to that, I just want to quickly, since we're on the topic of e-buses, I just want to throw in a question to our audience. This is a poll question that will pop up for you, and we'd love to get your inputs on that. The question is this: would e-bus advancement be more rapid than the e-vehicles? And your options are very simple. It's yes, no, or maybe. The question once again is: would e-bus advancement be more rapid than the e-vehicles? We'd love for you to take a moment out and just punch in your answers to that, and we'll continue our conversation. Mr. Singh, I believe you wanted to make a comment.
Yeah, our speakers very rightly pointed out few things. So maybe I'll tackle one by one, starting from the end. So the first point is, in terms of the charging infrastructure, we need to draw our attention towards the charging point from the charging stations. Charging stations are the ones which take up a lot of space, and even if we see in the west, the focus is now on charging point. Charging point you can put up anywhere. Even a local panwala or local chai shop guy, he can put up the instrument outside, and then he can start earning from that. Maybe I'll just give one information. I am also the part of the BIS committee, who's the ETD 51, which is formed for the charging infrastructure standardization. So I'm happy to also tell you that we are also working on the two-wheeler AC charging standard, which is first of its kind in the world. So nowhere this particular charging this type of charging standard exists. So India is going to come out with that type of charging standard through BIS soon. Now coming to the bus charging standard, so he rightly pointed out that we should have some sort of charging standard. So the opportunity charging or the pantograph charging, this is something on which the ETD 51 committee, and there is a panel already formed. So we are working on this also. Now I would like to also point out few things, that the charging needs of our vehicles. So we have two-wheeler. Let us just segmentalize. So 84% of the total vehicles in our country is two-wheelers. So the two-wheeler run is around maximum 40 to 50 kilometer per day. Okay, that is what the run is. So now whatever vehicles are available in EV space, that much is the capacity which is being provided by most of the vehicles. So you can you can charge your vehicle at home.
Right.
You can charge your vehicle any place. That means that range anxiety, that is, people
Yes.
shouldn't be bothered about that in case of the two wheelers. Coming to the bus, so 250 kilowatt hour battery can actually run for 200 kilometers. Now I'm talking about the 9-meter bus. So that particular so that means with one charge you can actually go around and run in a city, and you can put the vehicle, that means the bus at the depot, and charge it overnight. So that is the second thing. Third thing is, in case of the four wheelers also in India, the running is not that much. It comes, I think, in average around 20 to 25 kilometers per day overall average. So that is also again the question which, how often we go on a trip of 200 kilometers, 300 kilometers, 400 kilometers. So should we plan for the 400 or 500 kilometers? So those are the things which people or the early adopters also need to think about. Having said so, government has already, as you already know, that 3 kilometer by 3 kilometer grid in the selected urban cities, that is the target. And for the highways, on both sides of the highways, at least 25 kilometers, there should be one charging infrastructure. Highways and expressways both included. That is what is the target as of now.
Absolutely, that's very true. And I want to take one point that you made about the range anxiety. I want to take that ahead to Charu, ma'am, because yes, that is a very valid point. And while the government has deemed public electric vehicles charging a delicensed activity, which is allowing the private sector to set up charging stations as per prescribed standards, the concern is that private players are reluctant to invest heavily in charging stations given the uncertainty around revenue generation, land, electricity load, etc., etc., all of that. uh, from your research, how are you seeing things improve, or what more light can you throw on this? What more needs to be done here that can help ease this?
Yes. So you very rightly said that, I would kind of like to allude to the point that Mr. Radhir Singh from Niti Aayog made, that, yes, people do say range anxiety is an issue, but is it really an issue, or is it an issue for all type of vehicle segments? Definitely not. Many vehicle segments do not even travel the range that the vehicle provides in a day. So definitely overnight charging is an option, but we do need public charging stations for vehicle segments like, last mile connectivity or freight, or public transportation, which actually travel more vehicle kilometers than the range of the vehicle in a day. And coming back to your question, what more can we do and how do we see? I think private players definitely will make the change and they will scale up charging infrastructure. But one important stakeholder, that we are missing here are the utilities, the distribution companies. So now, if we develop utility programs and policies that actually advance electric mobility, it will actually allow for streamlined EV grid infrastructure investments, grid connections. Utilities can to some extent provide land as well, and power and manage the power system. So bringing in the utilities and helping them step up to this responsibility would also be very important. We have some utilities, if you look at Delhi BSES or Bangalore Bescom, there are some very good best practices that other utilities in India can learn from. But we need more utilities to step up and actually support these charging infrastructure. Another thing, that we've seen at NRDC from our research in the US and China, again, utilities are an important part. But just to give an example, make ready investments, it's a term that's being used in the US very regularly now. And what that exactly means is that the utility will build the grid infrastructure till the metering point. So in that case, a big chunk of the cost that actually goes to the charging service provider to make sure that they have the right connection to the grid, and they are then paying from the for the transformer, the cabling. So all that cost is basically taken up by the utility.
Absolutely. Okay. I have a question for Mr. Krishnan, sir. But before I come to you, I just quickly want to toss out our second poll question to our audience members. This is the second poll question for you, which comes up on your screen. It says, does India have adequate charging infrastructure for e-buses in India? Again, the options are yes, no, and maybe. Does India have adequate charging infrastructure for e-buses in India? Would love to hear your answers to that. Mr. Krishnan, just moving with this conversation ahead to you and kind of with the poll question that I came up. Now, I know currently you're doing taxis, you're using vehicles as taxis, but I believe there's some conversation in your company about maybe creating an EV freight vehicle. Uh, is that something that you're experimenting actively with, or can you share some insights on that? How do you see that panning out?
I think it's both buses as well as freight. And I think on both those sides, and buses is more in terms of intercity and intercity, where there are lots of sister cities and with very high volume thoroughfare between, so Bombay, Pune, or Surat and Baroda, or Baroda and Ahmedabad. There is a fair amount of thoroughfare between them, or Bangalore, Mysore. And there are lots of these which are almost within 200 kilometers of each other, and which can be exploited for intercity buses very easily, even with existing technology. So you don't have to wait, and it's pretty viable today, right? So that's where we are going, and freight as well. I think you will hear about, the idea is that whichever segment, mobility is monolithic from a layman perspective, but mobility, when segmented at whichever segment becomes viable commercially, then we will get into it. We did that with corporate transport. I don't think curbside urban mobility is still viable because of the fact that of charging infrastructure. But when we that's the reason we got into a very very large but very specific segment for us. Yeah, buses as well. So yeah, freight is a huge opportunity. It's big. It's as big or bigger than the people mobility. It's far more structured in a certain way. It's pretty much almost 95% or 100% privately owned, right, in terms of the demand and supply, right?
Mr. Ramchandran, I'm coming to you on this point because while electrification of rails and metros is becoming is happened and has happened a lot with the metros especially, the bus is this last mile connectivity, this very important cog in the whole system, because as every Indian we would use bus as a first point and metros and rails later. How are you seeing development happen here, this spurt of growth that we need for e-buses? Are you seeing that happen very soon, major hurdles, or what do you see is the way ahead for that?
Well, I believe the buses or the heavy transport as would be the one which would be drive the e-mobility, because it is the one which goes most commercial. So when it is, I think that means that we need to work out more cost-effective proposals or viable solutions as such. It will take a little longer time in the car because obviously in India the car segment is per carbon per capita is much lower, and it may take much longer time because of the populations of cars compared to the other places would be more or less. So I think the solution would come. We we are in fact in Delhi. Some of the thinking is there for the first mile connectivity and the last mile connectivity. They are thinking in terms of e-buses, but beyond that, there are also solutions which are coming from e-train, and I'm sure that this area is going to be driven very very strongly by the market forces. That is the reason once standardization is there, and as Mr. Kannan was here, that people would be coming in more and more into this as the market forces would push in as such as.
Right. I'll bring in Mr. Singh on this. Mr. Randir Singh, what Mr. Ramchandra was also speaking about, that with e-buses, and coming back to my first question to you, is the impact of the government's policies to be made to, acceptance of to get e-buses into the system, to get e-buses into the public transport system. So with you at the Niti Aayog, how are you seeing what more is going to be done, or how are you seeing the roadmap ahead? When can we get more e-buses on our roads?
Okay, now, so very valid thing. See, the focus of Niti Aayog as well as the government is also on the shared mobility and the public mobility, even in terms of the electric vehicles. So, FAME 2 has a provision for 7,090 electric buses. Already close to 6,000 buses has already been sanctioned, and out of that almost 2,700 buses tender has been completed. In fact, 2,000 plus buses, around 2,158 to be very specific, agreements has already been signed for the electric buses in different cities. So that is right now status, but the target is to penetrate up to the 7,000 plus buses and to flood some of the selected cities with the full electric buses, so that the sort of the scale and the availability of the public transport is visible all around. The the buses is not only drives the particular revolution, but it also symbolizes that the intent, what is the intent of the policymakers is. So this I want to very much clarify, that the shared mobility and the electric buses very much is the main focus even in the FAME 2, and if any revision within the FAME 2 which will come, the same thing is going to be one of the focus areas.
Absolutely great. Thank you for that, Mr. Singh. We'll take a pause in the panel for just a short minute because I want to come up to the audience for our next poll question to them. This is the next poll question which is coming up right now. It says, would investing in electric mobility as part of the economic recovery will help achieve India's goals to create jobs, reduce air pollution, and combat climate change? The options again are yes, no, and maybe. The question for you is, would investing in electric mobility as part of the economic recovery help achieve India's goals to create jobs, reduce air pollution, and combat climate change? We would love to hear your answers on that. Coming back to the panel, this one's for Ms. Charulata. Ma'am, yes, Mr. Singh, you wanted to make a point.
So yes, last point. This
Yes.
clean, yeah, I mean clean energy, pollution-free cities. So these just 7,090 buses. These are going to save 1.5 million metric tons of CO2 net CO2 emissions. That would be the savings only because of these buses alone, which is in the FAME 2.
Mhm. Right, right. No, no, that's very much required. In fact, I believe in Delhi also, the CM Arvind Kejriwal was speaking about an initiative. I think it was called Switch on Delhi, which Switch Delhi, the Switch Delhi campaign, basically to promote EVs to combat the pollution that the national capital faces so often during the winter months and otherwise also. Um, Ma'am, coming to you with my question. So we were earlier talking in the panel about other countries not setting a precedent, but you and I said I would come back to this question later. So my question to you, ma'am, is about China. We look east for other things also, but if we look towards them for the EV, yes, I know their markets are different, their government is different, their way of the economy is different. But any inputs that we can take from them, the EV market there has grown a lot. It's literally exploded. We're still in our early stages, but any learnings from there that we could adapt, which would help our growth better?
Definitely, I think that's a very good question, Sumit. And though you said that the Chinese market is different, I agree it is. But in many ways, it's very similar to India as well. They also have a lot of two-wheelers. They also have three-wheelers. And if you look at
Mhm.
other Western countries and European countries, they don't have two or three-wheelers like China and India have. So I think that is something that we can definitely look up to China for. I think there are a few things that we can learn from China. The first is charging infrastructure. China currently has the world's largest charging infrastructure network. They have almost 40% chargers are public, remaining 60% are private. And in India also, we are currently saying we'll have 10% public, 90% private, and eventually that percentage is going to change. But the question is, how did China develop that charging network? We should definitely look up to that. The second is, zero emission vehicle policies and programs. China has a ZEV policy, which they call the new vehicle program, new energy vehicle program. So looking at those policies and seeing that, whether in some way can we, include the industry to have vehicles, more variety of vehicles, one, and to basically put some kind of target on the sale so that we have more electric vehicle adoption on the ground. The third is manufacturing facilities. So China has, if you see, they are the biggest market currently. They are building a lot of vehicles and globally, and India wants to reach there. So again, an area for India to learn from. The fourth is battery manufacturing and securing that supply chain. China has already done that, and we all kind of understand it's difficult now, but something again that India can look up to China for. And one last point, I think R&D, very very important. So research and development, we see China initially they started with taxis that were 150 to 200 kilometers range. Now the vehicles that are coming in China have 400-kilometer range. This is something that India also wants to reach there. So again, an area that India can learn from. So those were my points.
Fantastic. We're just about coming up to time on our panel, but I will come to the panels for one last set of questions along with closing comments. Mr. Krishnan, just wanted to get your insights on this. The impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. So you're on ground, you're running a business that is very much involved with EVs, providing these transportation facilities to corporates. the impact of COVID-19 on the business, and on how do you foresee the way ahead for e-mobility in the country? So you're on mute, sir.
I think the impact of COVID, is nothing special on electric vehicles per se. It is on the transportation, on urban transportation, because of work from home, right? And now, whether it is an Uber or Ola, or whether it is us, I think it's the right thing that people are working from home till they're vaccinated and everyone is safe, right? So obviously, business is down, absolutely. Now, one could sit back and mope and say, hey, government should have done this, government should have done that. But I think government's first job is to ensure that people are safe, which they've done. What we've done in this time period is a fantastic time for us to, one, shed excess fat, right? There is no better time, to shed
Yeah,
excess fat. To invest, right? We've invested on August, for example, August 15th of last year, in between this whole lockdown and, just after Unlock 1.0, we actually inaugurated India's largest, charging hub, which can fast charge 36 vehicles concurrently, right, in Pune.
lovely.
We're putting
Right.
one up in Calcutta now with the World Bank, which should be ready, sometime in the middle of March. We started one in Gurgaon a little over 12 months ago. And that way, we have, in this pandemic period, we've used that to build infrastructure in place, so that when the demand comes up, and yes, the demand could come up in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and, hopefully, it comes up, by latest by end of this calendar year. But I think whenever it comes up, I think it'll be fantastic. What we've noticed, and we've been in business for 6 years now, pioneering electric vehicles. I have never seen in those 6 years. I've seen a lot of talk. I've seen a lot of drum beating. But now what we see now is actually people saying, using COVID to say, "यार अभी बहुत हो गया diesel, बहुत हो गया petrol," and of course the 100 rupee rates help a lot, believe me. But corporates are actually saying, "This is a great time for me to do control alt del on my old contract, and when I do my no contract, it has to be EV," which is fantastic, right? Now,
Amazing.
whether
That's
it
sort of
is.
a reset
It's
mentality
fantastic.
that's
This is
worked
still the
well for
buyer.
EV.
Ultimately, the government, us, everybody can, want things to happen. But ultimately, it is the end
Yeah,
consumer. Once the end consumer kind of makes up their mind, and,
yeah,
there is that pull, then everything falls in place, right? Today,
absolutely.
for example, I think government has done a lot. People don't know that on a per vehicle basis, India provides more incentive per car than even a Norway. Now people keep saying, "Arey, government ने ज़्यादा नहीं किया," but actually government has done enough. Now the impact of that is only visible when you start selling vehicles in the hundreds of thousands, not in
Yes,
just the single digit thousands, right? Because the policy
absolutely.
cannot address stuff at single digit thousands, right? But they will
Mm-hmm.
make it for at least ये scale पे आएगा, then it will take it from hundreds of thousands to hundred, to millions, and that policy
And
is
that's
good
the
enough.
scale that,
In my opinion,
and that's the scale
I
we're
think the
hoping to
government
see soon.
done enough. I think it's done enough. There are enough tenders directionally. We don't want the government to own, charging stations across India or on every highway, or we don't want the government to own it in every gully. That's not the government's job, yeah. The government has put a framework in place. And like Mr. Singh
Yeah.
said, I think the municipal bus stuff is fantastic because, with all each state trying to do something many months ago or many, a couple of years ago, the Niti Aayog stepped in and they gave a model framework. You want money from the central government, this is the framework that you will adopt, right? And like you said,
Yeah.
5,000, 6,000 buses, right? And fantastic, each bus doing 300 kilometers a day, right?
Mhm.
Carrying thousands of people per day per each bus, right? And air conditioned, fantastic, low floor,
Yes.
beautiful, right?
Yes.
Right?
And like you said, maybe the future will see the next generation and the one after that using electric majors as landmarks rather than petrol pumps. I'm sure that will be one
Absolutely.
thing to look
हाँ,
forward.
I will
Thank you.
again, वो आगे के चार्जर से लेफ्ट लेना फिर दूसरे चार्जर से राइट लेना
It's going to be that. Thank you for that, Mr. Krishnan. I'll come to Mr. Ramchandra. So, your closing comments, and also one important point I would love for you to just shed more light on is that when these charging stations, so to say, come up, uh, the use of technology, rather, what I'm trying to say is that the need of technology, the use of technology is so much required, because grids need to become smart grids. They need to be able to regulate power demand and storage. So how are you seeing that evolve, and just with along with your closing comments?
Yeah, I think the use of technology as see more of large EV stations are going to come. It is going to make a massive impact on the grid, and as most of the speakers were saying, once the EV to be more popular, it has to be commercially viable. So as the one of the speakers was saying that the cost of electricity being 60%, the more the pollution of solar energy which is coming down, better it is. But for the EV charging system, because it will become much more viable, especially with 100 rupees of, per liter helping the way. So you see, once the solar proliferation which is happening, then there is a grid instability which would be coming in, because and we have got a lot of technologies like HVT systems or STATCOMs, or can control the grid instability, and also the energy management system, which would reduce the maximum demand of the system, would come down 30%. So we can give a complete optimized solution to see that the buses, when they know when to come. They don't have much lead time to come there. They don't say productive work standing there as such. More productive work would be
Right.
there on the road, carrying the passengers as such. So this can the complete solution can be built in intertwined as such, and we can be doing. India has got this technology with us, so I think it should be able to be put in the best way to the EV stations as such.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, sir. I'll come to Ma'am. Miss Charulata, your closing comments, just some thoughts that you would like to leave our viewers with as we wind up.
Yeah, I've been listening to the other panelists, and I think one thing that popped into my mind was, COVID definitely taught one thing and showed everything to the people of India, that yes, we can reduce air pollution, and what clear skies mean, and what less polluted cities mean. So now, when we are recovering back from this global pandemic, I think investing in sustainable technologies becomes very important. And the government, like Mr. Krishnan said, has taken the right steps. They recently came up with the scrappage policy also, initially for the government vehicles, then for the personal vehicles. And that is a welcome step, because we have a lot of older vehicles that are less efficient. They run on diesel, so they need to be phased out. And all the new vehicles that are coming, they can be replaced with EVs. So that is the whole idea, that when you are recovering,
Absolutely.
recover in a sustainable way, so that it lasts longer, and come up with better technologies and cleaner technologies to go forward with.
Absolutely. When you buy your next car or bike, let it be electric. And that's the hopefully the push that we're trying to get to. Mr. Singh, as we close the panel, just your final comments, your view for the way ahead, for the road ahead.
I mean, very good thoughts, I think, has come out, and a nice discussion. So I would say India has not yet reached to the inflection point for the EVs by FY 2022. This is what the when the battery prices, which are estimated to reach less than $100 per kilowatt hour, when the price parity between the electric vehicles and the internal combustion engines will reach without any subsidy. That would be the inflection point we are waiting for. And by that time, the government as well as the public, private and the public, that partnership has to happen. It so that we are ready for that particular change, that inflection point. So that is one which we have to target.
Thank you. It's been an absolute fantastic panel. Thank you, Mr. Singh. Thank you, Mr. Charulata. Thank you, Mr. Krishnan. And thank you, Mr. Ramachandran, for this
Thank you very
very
much.
insightful panel where we've been talking about electric mobility for mass public transportation, the path for EV revolution. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. Thank you so much for watching.